Mist drifted across the lawns of Alderbridge Manor as the carriage wheels groaned to a halt, their weary shudder echoing the tremor in Helena Ashford's breath. Dawn's pale light, still unsure of its own strength, glimmered against the windows of the estate she had once called home. Yet nothing in its familiar silhouette brought comfort now. She stepped down slowly, gloved fingers tightening around the worn leather strap of her travel case, aware of the housemaids at the doorway watching her with a curiosity sharpened by whispers. It was astonishing how quickly affection vanished when a woman's circumstances changed. Yesterday, she had been a young widow deserving sympathy. Today, she was something far more dangerous, a question without a proper answer. Helena felt the weight of her condition more keenly with every step along the stone path. The subtle swell beneath her morning gown was small enough to conceal for now, but large enough to draw suspicion from anyone who bothered to look twice. Morning lavender fluttered against her ankles as a chilly breeze curled around her. She clutched a small bundle of sealed letters, her husband's hurried scrawl, proof that he had loved her, proof he had known of the child before fate stole him away. They should have been her shield. Instead, they felt like fragile relics already losing power against a world determined to forget her. Lady Renford descended the manor steps with a grace polished by decades of entitlement. Her expression was carved from winter stone. "Helena, my dear," she said, soft enough for kindness to be assumed but not quite heard. "Your journey must have exhausted you. Rest will be your greatest ally now." Those words, spoken with such elegant indifference, marked the beginning of Helena's exile. For beneath them lay a verdict she recognized instantly. She was no longer welcome. That truth sharpened when the steward quietly pressed a small purse into her palm, eyes lowered not from respect but from shame. A family dismisses a servant with more ceremony, Helena thought, yet she curtsied because dignity was all she had left. She was escorted not to her old rooms but directly back to her waiting carriage. No maid carried her belongings. No footman offered warmth. As the horses lurched forward, Helena caught one final glimpse of the estate, its rose vines, its immaculate windows, its grand promise of sanctuary. A promise rescinded. One housemaid leaned toward another, murmuring, "Do you see how she holds her cloak? She hides more than sorrow." The door shut before Helena could hear the response, though she already knew its shape. Rumors required little truth to grow. Her journey to Bath was quiet save for the occasional rattle of wheels. At the posting inn, Helena slipped inside hoping to remain unnoticed, but anonymity belonged to men, not women with mourning veils and trembling hands. A cluster of matrons sipped their chocolate near the window, eyes narrowing as Helena entered. "A widow traveling alone," one whispered. "Travel, they say. But one can see." The sentence wilted beneath a sharp hush. Helena lowered her gaze, pretending not to hear, though their words pressed against her ribs with more force than grief ever had. Later, in the privacy of her rented room, she unfolded her husband's final letter. Ink smudged slightly where her tears had fallen weeks ago. "If anything happens to me, promise me you will speak to Blackwell. He is a man of honor. He will not let them cast you aside." Helena had once taken comfort in those lines. Now they felt like a burden too heavy to lift. Still, she traced each curve of ink with a tenderness that bordered on desperation. There was no one else left to turn to. No dowry. No home. No protection for the child who stirred faintly beneath her hands. She imagined approaching the Duke of Blackwell, Adrian Blackwell, the austere guardian of half the kingdom's influence. Society called him the realm's coldest bachelor, untouched by sentiment and far above reproach. He was the man young ladies dreamed of and dowagers praised, the man whose acceptance could secure legacies and whose rejection could ruin families. How could she, a 19-year-old widow stripped of fortune and standing, walk into his world and ask him for something no woman had ever dared to request? What shattered her hesitation was not courage but necessity. Helena pressed a trembling palm to her belly, feeling the faint swell beneath layers of fabric. Her child would enter a world ready to deny him a name, and she would not allow that. She packed her few belongings with deliberate care, folding each garment as though order might summon strength. She whispered to her reflection, "You will not break." Her voice wavered, but the words remained whole. The evening passed in restless silence. She lay awake listening to the distant rhythm of hooves clattering along the street. She imagined London again, the towering facades, the polished carriages, the air thick with ambition. Somewhere within that city, the Duke resided behind gates of iron and expectation, his world defended by traditions older than Helena herself. To seek him out was to step into a storm. But storms, she told herself, at least acknowledged one's presence. Ignoring the world had proven far more painful. By morning, gray light seeped into her room, revealing the tired shadows beneath her eyes. Helena descended the inn's staircase with a resolve she did not fully feel. The innkeeper's wife stared openly, pity mingling with curiosity. Helena did not linger. She strode toward the waiting carriage, lifting her chin as though invisible hands urged her forward. Shame might follow her, but so would determination. When the carriage rolled onto the London road, Helena gazed through the window at the endless stretch ahead. Trees blurred into soft ribbons of green and gold. Clouds sketched pale promises across the sky. Her heartbeat steadied not because she believed the Duke would help her, but because she had chosen motion over surrender. The narrator of her life would not speak in terms of defeat. Not yet. As the city's distant spires finally pierced the horizon, Helena tightened her grasp on her husband's final letter. The ink glimmered faintly in the morning light, a fragile thread tying her past to a future she could not yet imagine. The carriage wheels clattered over the first cobblestones of London, ringing like a quiet summons. She whispered a prayer for courage, though she doubted heaven could hear her over the city's rising hum. At last, as Blackwell House came into view, its gates of wrought iron towering like judgment, Helena felt her breath falter. She closed her eyes for one trembling moment. Then the carriage halted, and the narrator of her fate whispered through her thoughts, "Desperation can reshape destiny, if one dares to knock on the door that terrifies them most." The iron gates of Blackwell House rose before Helena like the entrance to another world, one where power was carved into every line of stone and every polished surface. Her carriage halted with a lurch, the horses snorting clouds of white into the crisp London air. Footmen, dressed in immaculate livery, paused mid-step as they noticed the lone woman descending without escort, her lavender morning gown fluttering like a wilted blossom against the grand facade. Their uncertainty gathered in the air, silent yet unmistakable. Women did not call upon a duke without invitation, and certainly not widows whose reputations were already bruised by rumor. But Helena forced herself forward, her heart pounding with a rhythm more forceful than the city behind her. Inside the entry hall, marble tiles gleamed under the morning light streaming through the tall windows. A butler with a posture as rigid as carved oak approached her, his face unreadable but his gaze flickering briefly to the slight curve beneath her gown. "Madam," he murmured, bowing out of courtesy rather than welcome, "His Grace receives petitioners by appointment only." Helena clasped her travel case tighter, drawing courage from the memory of her husband's faded letter. "I have come on an urgent matter," she answered softly. "Please, tell him it concerns Lord Ashford." Something in her voice, perhaps its tremor, perhaps its sincerity, softened the butler's severity. He inclined his head and vanished down a long corridor, leaving her alone beneath the chandelier's cold brilliance. As Helena waited, she felt the heavy gaze of those passing through the hall. The Marchioness of Holloway, draped in emerald satin and diamonds fit for a coronation, paused as she recognized the unescorted widow. Her lips curled in elegant disdain. "My dear," she murmured to a companion loud enough for Helena to hear, "these halls are no place for women who have lost control of their circumstances." Laughter, delicate as shattered glass, rippled behind her. Helena lowered her gaze, willing herself not to wilt under the scrutiny. Shame wrapped around her like a second veil, but beneath it flickered a small, stubborn flame that refused to die. Moments later, the butler returned. "His Grace will see you," he announced, though his tone betrayed subtle surprise. He led her down a passage lined with portraits, stern ancestors whose painted eyes followed her with silent judgment. At the end of the hall, double doors opened to reveal a study filled with dark mahogany, gilded maps, and shelves of leather-bound volumes. And there, near the tall window, stood Adrian Blackwell, Duke of Hawthorne. His figure was straight-backed, composed, every line of him shaped by discipline and expectation. Sunlight framed his shoulders, turning the edges of his dark coat to glints of gold. Helena had prepared herself for indifference, but nothing prepared her for the intensity of his gaze as he turned toward her. She curtsied, her knees trembling beneath her. "Your Grace," she whispered, praying her voice would not betray the terror coiled inside her. Adrian regarded her with a composure that felt both intimidating and strangely attentive. "Lady Ashford," he replied. "To what do I owe your unexpected visit?" She clutched the letter in her hand, its frayed edges a reminder of the promises her husband had never lived to fulfill. "I come to you," she began, "because I have nowhere else to go. My husband, he wrote to you before he died. He believed you would understand." Adrian's brow tightened almost imperceptibly. He extended his hand. Helena placed the letter upon his palm, careful to avoid touching him. As he read, Helena studied the small gestures that betrayed the man behind the title, the slight tension in his jaw, the softening of his eyes at certain lines, the exhale that seemed to carry a history she could not yet comprehend. When he finally looked up, his expression had shifted, not warmer, but more attentive, more aware of the gravity of what had been revealed. "You are with child," he said quietly. The words were not an accusation, but they pressed against her chest with overwhelming heaviness. She nodded. "And they have cast you out for it?" Her breath faltered. "They said it was concern for my health. But no one who means to protect you sends you away with a single purse and no promise of return." Silence stretched between them, weighted and profound. Adrian stepped closer, his presence both commanding and strangely gentle. "Lady Ashford," he said, "you must know what it means to stand in this house and reveal such truths." She lifted her chin, though her courage trembled. "I do. But I have nothing left to preserve except my child's future." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or the ghost of a wound he kept deeply buried. He walked to his desk, opened a small drawer, and retrieved a delicate silver locket. Engraved with roses and thorns, it glimmered softly as he returned to her. "This belonged to my sister," he said. "Consider it a token of trust, temporary, until I decide what must be done." Helena stared at the locket, confusion tightening her throat. "Why would you give this to me?" His gaze held hers with a steadiness that felt almost like shelter. "Because your courage is not common," he said. "And because I suspect you have been forced to walk through a fire no one warned you about." She closed her fingers around the locket, feeling its surprising warmth. It was the first kindness she had received in months. Before she could thank him, the study doors burst open and a footman rushed in with a breathless apology. "Your Grace, forgive me, news has reached the press. A widow was seen entering Blackwell House unaccompanied. The Tun is already speaking." Adrian's expression darkened, but not with anger at the servant. Instead, he turned to Helena, something new and unsettling in his gaze. "It appears," he murmured, "that by seeking help, you have placed yourself at the center of a storm." The words lingered in the air, trembling with unspoken consequence, and Helena felt the first true shift of fate stirring at her feet. London's winter twilight draped itself over Helena's modest lodging like a weary shawl, its thin walls trembling under every passing carriage. She sat beside the small hearth, nursing a cup of weak tea that had long since cooled, her fingers trembling as fatigue settled deeper into her bones. The room smelled faintly of damp wool and old wood polish, a far cry from the lavender-scented chambers of Alderbridge Manor. Yet it was the safest place she could afford, a sanctuary bought with what little remained of the purse Lady Renford had pressed into her palm. Safety, however, had never felt so precarious. Each night, her body grew heavier, her breath shorter, her strength slipping like sand through an open fist. But it was not illness alone that gnawed at her. It was the growing realization that the world had decided she was no longer worth protecting. When the knock came at her door, sharp and unexpected, Helena flinched so violently she spilled her tea. She hesitated before answering, fearing one of the men who had begun sending unsolicited notes, men who believed a desperate widow was theirs for the claiming. But when she opened the door, the breath left her in a rush. Adrian Blackwell stood there, cloaked in dark wool, his presence filling the narrow hallway with an authority the building had never known. His hair was dusted with snow, his expression carved with concern that looked out of place on such a composed face. He had come in secret. She saw it in the hood that shadowed his features, in the urgency that tightened the line of his shoulders. No duke should be seen in a place like this. "Your Grace," she whispered, trying to gather herself. You should not. Forgive the intrusion, he interrupted gently, but I learned of your condition and could not stay away. His words startled her more than the visit itself. My condition, she echoed, as though the truth of her exhaustion had not been following her like an ominous shadow. His jaw tightened. Your physician speaks more freely than discretion allows. He feared for you. And he was right to. With slow, steady hands, Adrian removed his cloak and stepped inside, his presence instantly warming the small room. Helena tried to stand taller, to appear stronger, but the act lasted mere seconds before her vision blurred. She swayed. Adrian caught her with a swiftness that betrayed instinct rather than propriety. She found herself settled into the chair by the fire, his hands warm against her chilled fingers. Shame prickled across her skin. I did not wish to worry you, she murmured. I only wished to endure quietly, without becoming further burden. His eyes flashed with something fierce yet tender. You are not a burden, Lady Ashford. You are a woman surrounded by wolves, and I will not allow them to tear at what remains of your dignity. She felt the heat rise behind her eyes, a mix of gratitude and fragile disbelief. No one had spoken to her with such conviction since her husband's death. Adrian moved around the room, adjusting the weak flame, setting her fallen shawl over her shoulders, inspecting the cracked window with a frown. The care he gave to such small, ordinary things made her chest ache. When he finally settled beside her, the firelight reflected in his eyes like old sorrow awakening. Your husband wrote to me, he said quietly, not merely to inform me of your condition, but to ask that I look after you should the worst befall him. Helena's breath caught. He never told me, she whispered. Adrian nodded. He feared your in-laws would not honor his wishes. He knew their ambitions far too well. The truth wove itself around her heart with equal parts relief and pain. Her husband had trusted Adrian, had believed he would offer the protection they would deny her. The tenderness of the moment was fragile, like lace at risk of tearing. Helena held the silver locket he had given her earlier, its engraved roses and thorns warm from her touch. I cannot keep this, she whispered. It carries too much sentiment. She extended it toward him. Adrian closed her hand around it again, his fingers firm, his gaze unwavering. Then let it carry sentiment for you, until I decide whether I dare offer you something more. Her pulse fluttered violently, unsure whether he meant obligation or something far less expected. But in his eyes she sensed a shift, subtle yet undeniable, as though he were beginning to see her not as a petitioner but as a person carved from resilience he both admired and feared. A sudden knock shattered the quiet. Helena stiffened. Adrian rose immediately, his authority filling the room like a drawn sword. When he opened the door, a young messenger thrust a folded paper into his hand before scurrying away. Adrian's expression darkened as he read. Word of your circumstances is spreading through London, he said grimly. Your lodging alone has become subject to speculation. Unsavory men believe you vulnerable. Helena swallowed hard. She knew danger was near, but not how near. Adrian stepped closer, his voice lowering to something resolute and dangerous. You cannot remain here. Not another night. She shook her head weakly. Where would I go, Your Grace? I have no family, no protector. He held her gaze with such intensity she felt the air thin between them. You will come with me, he said. Tonight. Helena's breath faltered. The scandal. He cut her off with surprising gentleness. The scandal exists already. Now we must decide whether to let it destroy you or transform you. His words wrapped around her like a promise she had never dared to imagine. And yet beneath them lay a truth more perilous than all the whispers London could muster. For the first time, Helena saw not simply the Duke the world revered but the man beneath, standing on the edge of a decision that could alter both their destinies. And when he extended his hand, not in command, but in invitation, she understood with startling clarity. Whatever choice she made next would become the turning point of everything that followed. Snow had not yet fallen on London, but the morning carried the hush of something waiting to break as Adrian Blackwell's carriage stopped outside Helena's lodging. The street, narrow and uneven, seemed almost offended by the polished presence of a duke's crest glinting in the pale light. Curtains twitched. Doors cracked open. Whispers scattered like startled birds. Helena stood at the threshold with her shawl drawn close, her exhaustion softened by a fragile determination. She had slept little, torn between dread of scandal and the startling comfort she felt in Adrian's presence the night before. Now, as he stepped down from the carriage, tall, self-assured, wrapped in a coat of deep charcoal, she felt the quiet shift of fate tightening around her, threading her life ever closer to his. He extended his hand not with the cold precision of aristocratic courtesy but with a gentleness that unsettled her heart. "We must leave at once," he murmured. "The longer you remain, the more they will invent in order to tear you apart." His gaze flicked to the windows above them, where shadows hovered, listening. Helena hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady, as though sealing an unspoken promise. When he helped her into the carriage, the murmurs around them swelled, a wave of gossip that would crash across London before nightfall. Yet inside the velvet-lined interior, she felt something unprecedented: safety. The carriage lurched forward, wheels clattering over cobblestones slick with morning frost. Helena watched the cramped streets bow away as they moved toward broader avenues where gas lamps glimmered like suspended stars. She caught Adrian's reflection in the window, composed, unreadable, but with a quiet storm coiling beneath the surface. "Your Grace," she whispered, struggling to steady her voice, "this will only worsen the scandal." He turned toward her, his expression firm yet strangely tender. "Scandal is an echo, Lady Ashford. It grows only when no one speaks to challenge it. Today, I choose to speak." Her breath faltered at the certainty in his tone. "But you owe me nothing." A shadow passed over his features, the kind that hinted at old grief and buried resolve. "That is where you are wrong," he said. "I owe your husband my loyalty, and I owe you the protection he begged me to give." His words struck her with equal parts gratitude and sorrow. Protection was a gift, yes, but also a duty. Duty lacked warmth. Duty lacked tenderness. And she feared she might want more from him than duty could ever offer. When the carriage rolled beneath the wrought iron gates of Blackwell House, Helena felt her pulse quicken. Footmen hurried to open the door, their eyes widening as the Duke himself stepped out and offered his hand to a woman who looked far too fragile to survive the storm about to engulf her. "Prepare my sister's chambers," Adrian instructed. "Have the fire lit immediately." His staff exchanged startled glances. Such accommodations had been sealed for years. But none dared question him. Helena followed as he guided her inside, her breath catching at the sight of marble floors reflecting the soft glow of morning chandeliers. The house seemed to exhale around her, vast and immaculate, as though waiting to see if she belonged or merely trembled at its threshold. Adrian led her through a corridor lined with tapestries of roses and winter storms until they reached a suite of rooms softly lit by pale blue drapery. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old memory. "These belong to my sister," he said quietly. "She would have welcomed you." Something deep within him flickered: pain, affection, loss, and Helena felt her chest tighten with empathy she could not yet voice. When he stepped closer, adjusting her shawl where it had slipped from her shoulder, she felt the world narrow to the space between their breaths. Yet he withdrew before she could mistake kindness for something far more delicate. Later, in the conservatory, where winter roses climbed pale stone walls and lanterns cast gentle halos of gold, he stood facing her with a resolve that seemed carved from the dusk itself. "There is only one way to silence the rumors," he said. "One way to give your child a name unassailable by those who would see you ruined." Helena's heart stilled. She had known this moment might come, yet hearing it aloud felt like stepping into a dream she had not dared to imagine. "Marry me," he said with quiet intensity. "Let the world see that you stand under my protection. Let your child inherit my name and my honor." The lantern light shimmered across the glass, flickering like candlelight on water. Helena's eyes widened, her breath catching in disbelief. "Your Grace, do you understand what you offer? A duchess should come from power, from influence, from flawless reputation. I am none of those things." He stepped closer, his voice soft yet unyielding. "You are courage, Lady Ashford. You are dignity. And you carry innocence that deserves better than the world has offered. She felt tears prick her eyes, not from sorrow but from the overwhelming weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time since her husband's death. Still, fear clawed at her. They will say you act from pity. Adrian shook his head. Let them. Pity is what cowards name the actions of men who choose to do what is right. She pressed a trembling hand to her stomach, feeling the subtle movement of new life beneath her palm. I do not wish to burden you. His reply came swiftly, almost fiercely. You are not a burden. You are a responsibility I welcome. Silence settled between them, lush and trembling. She searched his face for deception and found none, only sincerity shadowed by something deeper, something he guarded but could not fully conceal. She lowered her gaze, her voice scarcely more than breath. Then I accept. A softness broke across his expression, fleeting but unmistakable, like the quiet relief of a man who had held too many storms alone. Their moment, however, shattered when a footman entered, bowing low but unable to hide his alarm. Your Grace, a letter has arrived. Urgent. From Lady Renford. Helena felt her pulse lurch as the envelope was placed in Adrian's hand, the familiar crest glaring like a threat. He broke the seal, his eyes scanning the page before he looked up, the faintest shadow of anger darkening his features. It seems, he said quietly, your past is not yet finished trying to destroy your future. Helena sat very still as Adrian folded Lady Renford's letter and set it on the table between them, the paper's sharp crease slicing through the fragile peace of the conservatory. The roses around them seemed to lean closer, as though listening. Lantern light shimmered along the Duke's jaw, revealing a tension she had not seen before, an anger carefully wrapped in control. She demands an audience, he said quietly. She claims you deceived her. She insists the child you carry cannot be acknowledged by any respectable household, let alone mine. His voice never rose, but beneath its controlled calm lay a storm he was choosing, with great difficulty, not to unleash. Helena felt the old fear stir, cold as the winter wind pressing against the glass. She wishes to shame me publicly, she whispered, to ensure no one believes I ever belonged to them. Adrian's gaze sharpened with something far fiercer than mere disapproval. She wishes to erase you, he corrected. But you are not so easily erased. His words warmed her like a fragile flame cupped against the dark. Yet the letter's presence on the table glinted like a blade, reminding her that truth alone could not protect her. Not in a society where perception held more power than fact. The next morning, Lady Renford arrived at Blackwell House in a carriage that gleamed like a polished threat. Her entrance was a performance wrapped in mourning silks, her posture rigid enough to suggest righteousness, though her eyes betrayed something sharper. She was shown to the Duke's reception room, an elegant chamber lined with portraits of men who had wielded power more quietly and more honorably than she ever could. Helena entered a moment later, her hands clasped over her abdomen, her breath steady despite the tremor beneath her ribs. Adrian stood beside her, tall and immovable, his presence radiating a protective strength that steadied her steps. Lady Renford turned, offering Helena a smile composed of brittle civility. "My dear," she said, "I fear you have made a grave error. You are young. You are frightened. But to entangle His Grace in your circumstances is unconscionable." Her gaze drifted deliberately to Helena's figure, her meaning clear. "We both know my son could not possibly have—" Helena stiffened, but Adrian stepped forward before the lie could fully unfurl. "You will not finish that sentence," he said, his voice quiet enough to be dangerous. "Your son wrote to me himself. He confirmed his wife carried his child. He feared your ambition would erase her claim should he not return." Lady Renford blanched, though she masked it quickly, summoning indignation to her defense. "Letters can be forged," she spat. "And desperation makes a woman capable of anything." Helena felt the insult slice through her, yet she did not bow beneath it. She met Lady Renford's gaze with steady sorrow. "I forgave you long ago for wishing I were someone more convenient," she said softly. "But I will not allow you to decide what my child deserves." The moment hung in the room like suspended breath. Then Helena reached into her pocket and withdrew the sealed envelope she had carried for weeks, the letter her husband had placed into her hands the night before he rode out for the last time. The seal bore their family crest, unmistakable and untouched. She extended it to Adrian, not Lady Renford, because she trusted only one person in the room to read it truthfully. Adrian broke the seal with deliberate care, his eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. As he read, something in his expression changed, softened, then tightened, then filled with a fierce protectiveness Helena had not dared to hope for. He looked up. "This is not merely a farewell," he said. "It is a declaration." He names Helena as his rightful wife. He names the child as his heir. And he begs that should he fall, someone of honor ensures both are protected. The words struck the room like a bell, resonant and undeniable. Lady Renford staggered back a step, her face paling as the truth dismantled the scaffolding of her carefully crafted illusion. You cannot allow this," she whispered, more plea than threat. "Think of your reputation, of your lineage." Adrian's reply was swift and unwavering. "My lineage is strengthened, not threatened, by choosing integrity over cowardice." He stepped closer to Helena, an unmistakable signal to anyone watching. He had chosen his side. The house seemed to breathe with him, the portraits watching with silent approval. Lady Renford's mouth tightened as she realized she had lost, not just the argument, but the narrative she hoped to control. With a stiff bow and a brittle expression, she left the room, her departure echoing with the weight of a battle she had never imagined losing. When the doors closed behind her, Helena sagged into the nearest chair, her strength nearly spent. Adrian knelt before her, his hands steadying hers. "You stood bravely," he murmured. "Most would have crumbled under such venom." Helena felt tears gather, hot and sudden. "I have crumbled many times," she whispered. "But you kept helping me rise." He shook his head gently. "You rose long before I arrived. I merely witnessed it." The days that followed unfolded like a dream tinted with both tenderness and fear. Invitations for their wedding were drafted, though Adrian kept the ceremony small, intimate, sheltered from the hungry eyes of the ton. Seamstresses fitted Helena with gowns of soft ivory, their hands surprisingly gentle as they worked around her growing form. Whispers surged through London, some cruel, some curious, some grudgingly admiring, but for the first time, Helena felt their power less keenly. She had a protector now, yes, but she also had a voice, strengthened by every moment she had survived. On the morning of the wedding, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the chapel floor in hues of rose and gold. Helena walked slowly toward Adrian, her gown whispering against polished stone, her veil drifting like a quiet promise. Adrian stood waiting, dressed in formal black trimmed with silver, his expression carved with reverence she had never seen directed at her before. When she reached him, he took her hands, lifting them gently, as though anchoring himself to something precious. "You feared being forgotten," he whispered so only she could hear. "But you were unforgettable from the moment you walked into my study with more courage than the peers who presumed to judge you." Helena blinked back tears as he continued. "I vow to honor you, to protect your child as my own, and to ensure that no voice in this world dares question your worth again." She swallowed, her heart trembling. "And I vow," she whispered, "to rebuild what life tried to break. With you." Their vows sealed, the chapel doors opened to a rush of golden air. Outside, a soft snowfall had begun, unexpected, quiet, shimmering against the winter light. Adrian drew Helena close, his arms steady around her. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt her future open, wide and bright. But just as they stepped into the drifting snow, a footman raced toward them, breathless and pale. "Your Grace," he gasped. "Urgent news. There has been a development regarding the Renford estate." Helena felt her breath catch as the world shifted once more. Adrian turned, his expression sharpening. "What development?" The footman swallowed hard. "It concerns the heir."